Let's see if it's recording now. I had problems with Teams. Okay, we are recording. This is lesson 12. 12 is my favorite number. Just so you know, the 12th of May is a very special day for me. Keep that in your calendars. It's my birthday. Anyhow, this is lesson
Okay.
12. We have the one and only Wael Hamze here. He's doing lesson 2 of the ALM Zero to Hero. Last week was, as he classified, a little bit of the zero level, people getting up to speed and when it comes to ALM and governance in Power Platform. And today I have great expectation because it's going to be that hero level, and I'm excited for this lesson. Well, thank you so much for dedicating time to this initiative. The floor is yours. Take it away, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. It's always good to be here. Thank you again, everyone, for joining. Hopefully, you enjoyed the first session. We'll take this session to the next level. Before we start, again, I'm just posting some links here. So if you've got any questions after the session, please feel free to connect, and we will try and answer as many questions as possible. So let's get started again. So the agenda. So last session we've spoken about security. So don't worry today, we're not going to talk much about security. And then we've spoken about ALM. So we've did some basic ALM setup in terms of exporting and importing solutions using some fairly basic stuff. So that gives us a good foundation for moving forward. So today we're going to talk about some of the other scenarios in ALM that you may face during your projects and how to kind of overcome them. And then we're going to talk a little bit about governance as well in the end around COE toolkit and some of the accelerators that can help you in the ALM space as well. So basically lots of things to go through today. Let's see how much we can cover today, by the way, and feel free to ask any questions as we go along as well. Okay. So just to recap, last session we've spoken about this export pipeline. So it was fairly straightforward. We export from the dev environment, we update the version, and then we trigger a build, which then generates the solution, and then we import it into more than one environment. So fairly simple flow, which works for a lot of the use cases. So today we're going to take a look at some of the other things you can do as well. So one of the first things I'm going to cover today is version control. So in the last session, we've spoken about how we export the solution from the dev environment and then we import it into the test environment. But we're kind of treating in that scenario the dev environment as the master. And then, ideally, we want a way of managing our configuration and version control because we want to track history. We want to do merges in some cases. We want to see what's going on. We want to have an audit of everything. So there's a lot of good reasons why we want to use version control. So, so basically, how do we do version control with Power Platform in general? So basically, we've got the citizen devs building basically configurations in the dev environment, and that is all and good. And then we got sometimes pro dev building things like plugins, PCF controls, all these kind of things that require JavaScript, C# code, and some of the integrations. And then at some point, then the pro dev will then generate the assemblies or the controls, and then they will deploy them into the dev environment. And now we've got a fusion team kind of working together, and we've got a feature delivered that includes kind of different capabilities in the platform. Some of them code, some of them configuration. So now the next step is to kind of push that into version control. So from a pro dev perspective, it's quite straightforward because it's just source code. So it's the standard thing you would normally do when creating standard applications. So we just pushed these source code files into version control. However, if we kind of talking about configuration now, the configuration is still sitting in the dev environment because that's how currently things work. So what we need is basically we need to export the solution from that dev environment for the configuration that we need. And then we need to unpack the solution into files that can be stored in version control. And then only at that point that we can store these files in version control. So that is the kind of gap that we need to cover, and the experience, the user experience will may be different depending on the persona that is working in and the kind of skills that they have. So under the covers, how does this work? So there's been a tool in the platform that's been around for a very long time. It's called the Solution Packager. And a lot of the current modern or wrappers around that, they kind of still probably use the same engine. But essentially what you have is a solution zip that you export from the dev environment. And then the idea is to unpack it. So once you unpack it, you get all these different files that are very kind of source control friendly. So your entities get broken down, you got forms, relationships, steps. So all this kind of stuff can be nicely stored in version control. The only caveat to that is things like binaries. So things like plugin assemblies or web resources. So I wouldn't say these are, version controlled items. So normally we store the source of things in version control, but things like assemblies, I would say they're binaries, so they don't normally live in version control. So normally if you export a solution in your dev environment, you get these assemblies and JavaScript files in that solution, but we don't want to store them within version control. So what we do is we provide a mapping file. So we say that actually for anything that we're managing in version control, we want to skip that and don't put it into version control. So then what we end up is with only the things that we need in version control. And then after that, at some point in the future, we then want to generate the solutions back for deployment. So then we use that mapping file again. So we build the assemblies at runtime from the latest kind of source or the required source in version control. And then we kind of merge the two together and we get, a solution back on the other end. So that's the kind of process that kind of takes the solution, puts it in version control, and then we kind of use the same process to kind of put it back together. So that's how it works at a high level. We'll go through some more details in terms of how that works in practice as well in a bit. So let's move forward. So the first thing I'm going to cover is the kind of how does the pro dev interact with version control, and I'm going to focus on configuration at this point because things like plugins and web resources, I think that's a fairly standard process. There is lots of tools you can use to do that, but it's a fairly standard from a development perspective. So in general, let's assume the pro dev is going to be doing some plugins, maybe there's some configuration. So again, they go into the dev environment. They need a way now to export the solution, extract the solution, and then what they will do is they will commit the changes directly in version control from their kind of the developer machine. After that, a build will kick in. So it will get whatever sources that the developer has committed, and then it will can generate an artifact. So the output of this process is a solution then that we can deploy to the next environments in this stage. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to kind of use a slightly different technique than we used last time. So last time we used the Power Platform build tools, but I want to show you different ways in which you can do things so you can make a choice when you're faced with a situation in terms of what's the best solution for you. So today I'm going to be using something called the PowerApps CLI. So in the past, we've had lots of tools in the SDK. So we've had like Solution Packager, we've had Package Deployer, we've got the PowerShell modules, and there's a lot of things you needed to know about to be able to do different things. So the idea of the PowerApps CLI is that is a single tool that kind of utilizes all these different things that you would normally do from an ALM perspective, and then pulls them together into one tool that can be executed from the command line. So you can see on the screen, the tool does a lot of things. Kind of one of the main things it does, for example, like solution management, but it also can do other things. Like if you're creating PCF controls or plugins, or you want to do some administration on the environments, you can do all of that within the PowerApps CLI. So it's a very powerful and abstracted way of doing things that can get you probably most of the things that you need done. And there's probably more likely in the future that we have more things that you can do with the PowerApps CLI as well, because we've got regular updates to this tool and there's more and more features that are coming regularly. So let's do a quick demo. So I'm gonna switch into my browser now. I've got a lot of demos today, so hopefully we can get through most of them. Hopefully you can see my screen. So again, I'm gonna refer back to my solution. So we've got this sample solution, we've got a form in here. So let's click on that form. Let's try and make some changes. So imagine, you're the maker now, you want to make some changes. I don't want to make too many complicated changes. But let's try, for example, in this scenario, let's just move some fields around the form. So let's drag this down. And then that is a very simple change. So all we have to do now is just save. And then once that is saved, then we can publish, and that change is now, ready in the dev environment. Unfortunately, things tend to be a little bit slow today on this, but hopefully, we can move forward quickly. So that saving is done. Okay. So while this is publishing, which I'm sure it will publish fine, I'm just gonna go back into my PowerShell window now. So let's do that. So it's not this PowerShell window. Let's go to the next one. I think it's that one. Okay, so this is my kind of PowerShell command line. This is where you kind of would use your pack tool. So if you hit pack, it will tell you, the list of things that you can do, using the pack tool. So what we want to do now, since we've done that change, is we want to export the solution. So if you want to export the solution, there is a command called pack export. You provided the file that you want and the name of the solution, as you can see on the screen. You hit that, enter, and then it's going to go in and try. It says the solution already exists because I've already exported that solution. So I'm going to export it again, delete the solution, and then export it again. So what that's going to do is just going to bring the solution down from the dev environment. And then once I've got that solution down, then what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and unpack that solution into, lots of different files, and hopefully, we can see the changes that we've made in the dev environment. So let's just wait a minute for that to export. If you've got any questions in the meantime, you can go ahead and ask them. Unfortunately, the export is not the fastest operation, but I've tried to keep the solution, quite small, so hopefully it won't take too long. Let me just go back and see whether the publish is done already.
I have an unrelated question, Will.
Yeah, sure.
So when you're gonna write and release your first book on ALM and governance?
When? Whenever I get the time, I guess. No, in the last few years, I've been kind of, busy with, updating open source tools and stuff. So, so hopefully now that things are, a little bit more mature in general, I think it's probably a good time to start thinking about something like a book. What does everyone think? Is book kind of the right format to kind of deliver this kind of content, or is it more like a videos? Or I'm keen to know what everyone prefers, actually.
Both.
Videos is better, I think.
Yeah, things move on quite quickly, so I'm sometimes worried that by the time you write a book, then things will be out of date.
That is true. That's a valid concern.
Okay, so we've got the solution exported. So the next thing is to unpack the solution. So all we're going to do is just say, this is the file, zip file, and then this is the folder where I want to unpack into. I'm going to worry only about unmanaged for now. So once I execute this, it's going to go in and try and, expand that solution. So let's move on to Visual Studio for now. Quickly. So this is my Visual Studio. So you can see I unpacked that solution. So it detected that there has been a change on the contact form. So if I double click on that, it should tell me, the differences, and you can see that some of the information has been moved around the form. So that is quite useful. So depending on whether you're working in one or more environments, now you may end up doing some merges or selecting what changes you want to commit, which can be a little bit difficult in some cases. So that's the only thing you need to be mindful, when doing something like that. So let's just do pro dev. I don't know. What you can do when you're committing, you can put a link to the user story or feature, or whatever you need to do. So let's just do user story 11, and then all I'm gonna do is just commit and push these changes into version control. So let's do that. Okay, so that's done. So from a dev perspective, that's you're done now. You've pushed your changes into version control, and in this case, I've pushed them into the master branch. We'll talk about branches in a second as well. But that's how you would potentially use the PowerApps CLI to get your changes from a dev environment and push them into version control. Now, I've done a lot of steps in here in the command line, but if you were to go down this route, you probably create a script that would combine all these steps into one click, so you can just execute one script and does all of these steps for you. I just wanted to show you step by step in here in terms of how you would do it. So let's go back into the slide quickly. So the next one we're going to cover is the citizen dev commit process. So we want everyone on the team to be committing into version control. So how do we do that for the citizen developers, or the people who don't want to go into version control or don't need to worry about version control? You just want to focus on delivering business functionality. So again, we've got somebody doing something in the dev environment. So they do their work within the solution, but at that point, they're done now. They don't want to have to worry about it anymore. So there needs to be something that triggers a build. Most of the ALM tools are kind of build friendly. So it's quite easy to create processes that interact with version control using the build system, because it's kind of designed to do this kind of work as opposed to something outside of that. So that's why it's kind of seems easy, or the best solution to trigger a build. So all of that build is going to do exactly what we've done on the developer machine. It's going to go into the dev environment, extract changes, put them in version control. And now the changes are in version control. So now we need to package them. So again, you can trigger another build and then does the packaging from version control. So it will pull out the sources and then generate the artifacts. Once we've got the artifacts, you can obviously then take these artifacts and deploy it into the next environment. Now there's a lot of things you can do in here. This is the basic process. So being able to take these changes and put them into version control. But you can do a lot more. You can run some more validations. You can get people to review these changes. So there's a lot of things you can intercept into this process and add your own logic as you see things fit for your team. So let's do another demo, but this time it's for the citizen dev. So again, I'm gonna go to my browser window. Let's make sure we go to the right one. Let's just, I don't know, let's make another change. Let's just put account name below the job title for just to get a simple change in there. And then things are getting quicker now. So that change is published. So let me just show you what happened previously. So when the pro dev came and did their changes, they, this is the change that we've just committed. So let me just refresh as well the screen. Yeah. So we just committed some recent changes into the main branch. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna push some more changes, but this time from the the citizen dev. So by the way, I just wanted to let you know as well, the PowerApps CLI is available from NuGet. So you can download it obviously from the standard download site and install it, but you can also get it from NuGet. And that's a good way in terms of, especially in terms of using it in the build process, which I will show you in a little bit. So I've created a pipeline called commit solution changes. So it's, the name is fairly descriptive. So let's imagine that the citizen dev now wants to commit their changes. And again, I'm going to trigger the pipeline manually, but there are ways in terms of you can automate this as well. So the first thing is I'm gonna select the branch. So I've created a branch called 0 to hero. So let's commit the changes into that branch. Let's say I don't wanna make the change directly into this branch. So the next thing the build is gonna ask me, put some comments. So I'm just gonna say solution changes, or let's just change this comment. So let's put a citizen dev, and then let's put a work item. Let's do number 18, yeah? So let's say I was working on work item number 18, and I want to push some changes into that. Solution name, again, I'm using the same solution, but you can change the solution name if needed. So I've provided all the information I want. So I want to push my solution into this branch, basically. So all I have to do is now, run this build and let it do its job. So in the meantime, while this is running, because it may take some time, I'm just going to show you what it's doing. So in this build, I'm not using the Power Platform build tools. Again, I'm using the PowerApps CLI. So the first thing you need to do is you need to get the PowerApps CLI from the NuGet gallery. So there is a task for that. So you just specify the name, which is here, which is basically the name that you get from here and the version that you need. The reason why I put a version in here is because sometimes you may find issues with certain versions, or you may be you may want certain features from a certain version, or you may not want to use the latest version. So it's always a good idea to kind of, if you agree with that assumption, is to kind of, use a specific version. So instead of having to repeat all this stuff over and over again, basically what I do is I say in the parameters here, this is my version. And yeah, this is the path on the build server to the PowerApps CLI. So, and this is the solution name. These are the parameters that we've just been kind of going through. So all I have to do now is, one is authenticate. So I'm using client secret authentication in this case. So I'm just retrieving the values from from a variable group in here. So it kind of lists all the different parameters, authentication, URLs, all this kind of stuff is there. So I authenticate, and then I export the solution, again, just passing the solution name, and then I unpack the changes. So unpacking the changes, again, I provide the zip and the solution name. So it's basically everything what we've done on desktop, we just do it in the build here. I clear the credentials at the end, so they're not stored on the, the server. And then I commit my customizations to Git using this process. And then finally, I create a pull request. So I used what I've committed to create a pull request. And there's various options in here, but I ticked like, link work items and all this kind of stuff in here. So you can go through it in detail if you like. But essentially, all this is going to do is just commit the changes to the branch and then create a pull request for me. So let's have a look and see if that completed. Okay, let's go back. Okay, so this should have completed now, yeah? Okay, it was fairly quick. So the best way to check if it's completed is to go in here and pull requests. So let's have a look what's in here. So let's do active. You see there's a new pull request coming in. So it's called citizen dev #18. So that's what we used before. So you can see this pull request is automatically linked into the user story. And if I want to see the changes, I can see, the fields that I've just updated. And then, if I want, I can approve these changes. And I can, you can run some validation builds on here if you want to run Power Apps Checker or anything else on here. You can also do that. But this is a way basically which allows the citizen dev to commit their changes, and then it allows also somebody to come in and review the changes before they get promoted into the next environment. So yeah, you can approve that pull request, and then obviously you can then resolve the conflicts as well. I'm not gonna go through that now, but you can see there has been 2 commits, one to the main branch, one to the other branch, and you were trying to merge them now. So there is a conflict. So that these are some of the things that you may come across if you kind of start using version control and merges. Okay. Any questions before we move on? Okay, let's go back into the slides. Okay, so let's talk about a number of ways in which you can do kind of isolation. And what I mean by isolation is how do you manage more than one person on the team, working on a solution or working on a feature or something. How do you minimize conflicts, basically? So one of the main features that we've had in the platform for a while now is called solution segmentation. So, a while back, we only used to be able to add the whole entity into the solution, but now we can be very specific about what we want to add into the solution. So basically what this means is, only add the things that you're working on or the things that you've changed. But don't add, the things that you haven't changed or worked on, because then you increase the chance of there being a conflict, and then your solution size gets bigger, and then you have to worry about, storing that in version control and managing, the deltas and having dependencies on things that you don't need. So basically, it's advisable that you kind of only put the things that you need in the solution. So let's look at, the one way of doing, the developer isolation. So let's assume we want to work in one environment. We don't want to do, multiple environments. Yeah. So, in the previous example, we had the main solution. So everyone was working in the main solution, and we've talked about some of the challenges with that. So this is one evolution over that. So instead of working in the main solution, every person working on that dev environment, so when they pick up an item that they want to work on, whether that's a user story or feature, they create a solution for that user story, and they mark it with the user story number or something, and then they work within that solution. And then once that solution is completed, or that feature is completed, then you merge that solution with the main solution, and then you promote it into the test environment. So basically that's how it works. Sorry, let me go back to the first one. So as you can see, there are still some challenges in here, because you could have the same item in solution 1 and 2, and then the person in solution 1 could have finished their work, but the person in solution 2 may have not finished yet. So there is still a risk of kind of, pushing some things over to the test environment that are not done, or potentially running into conflicts. So I think whichever way you go with it, eventually, just make sure that there is communication, because the communication can kind of resolve a lot of these challenges, and planning as well in terms of who does what. So the other alternative to this is you introduce another environment in the middle. So you still got people working on their own solution for the user story. However, you don't merge these changes into here. So as soon as somebody's done, then you push the change over to that other environment, and then you merge it into your main solution, and then you promote it forward. So this scenario's got some advantages, because you're only moving completed changes into this environment in most cases. So because this person here could be working on another entity that is already part of that solution in the previous scenario. So when you push that solution over, then it's got things from potentially these two solutions if they've already been in the solution. With this scenario, you kind of minimize that slightly, because you can work on this solution, but in isolation, and then you only push that solution forward. So anything that was being worked on here on number 2, or that's already in here, is not going to get pushed over to that environment. So you're only pushing changes that are completed into that environment, but you still want to move your kind of main solution from there into the test environment. So that's another kind of way of looking at it. And then there's also the environment-based isolation. So in the previous scenarios, we kind of worked with solutions. In this case, in a single environment. In this one, we're kind of working with the main solution, but we're doing it across different environments. So in this case, every person on the team, they've got their own development environments. Obviously, the overhead with that is you need to maintain your dev environment. You need to make sure that you've got the right version of your solution in that environment. And then you download the version of the solution into your environment. You make some changes, And then once you're done, you push the changes into the build environment, ideally via version control, because then you kind of merge the changes in version control, and then you only deploy things in the test environment. Any changes on this before I go ahead? Any questions?
I have one question.
Sure.
This last environment-based isolation, does it create a little bit of diff noise, let's say? Because of the GUIDs that might be different in the different environments.
It may create some challenges, I think, around merging and version control. There has been lots of improvements in the way the solution gets generated, like, over time. So the amount of noise you will get is significantly reduced than what it used to be. But you may still get some challenges in terms of merging or, diffs. Hence why, some people prefer to use this kind of approach where you kind of move the solution around as opposed to worrying about the version control, because even if you use something like this, you could still extract your changes from the build environment and push them into version control. So you still get the version control here, but it's not at the individual developer level, but at the kind of every time you do a build, you can extract your changes into version control to do the delta. So it depends really what you prefer and what the team prefers as well, whether they like to work with version control and look at, pick up what they're changing. I think there's advantages and disadvantages to each approach. So it's not like a clear winner here, I think, from my perspective at least. So it really what your preference is and what you're more comfortable with.
I think for a larger size team, the environment-based isolation works best, especially if you make one of the devs, or if there is already a dev lead or somebody that's in charge of just confirming that particular version is ready to go to test. I think it works best that way. I'm not saying that it's gonna be all breezy, but
yeah. I mean, this one is good. I think this one is also good for the scenarios where you've got potentially like big features. That imagine you have 3 teams and then each team is working on a different feature. So there is no way you can put them probably in one single environment and get them to use these small solutions, because they're completely, big features. They may have a different release cycle. One may be released 2 months down the line, the other maybe 6 months down the line. So in this case, you will need something like this as well, regardless of which approach. So sometimes you may end up kind of merging different options together to meet what you need for the requirement as well.
Makes sense.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about data. So data is quite important. I'm not necessarily going to talk about like data migration, because data migration is a separate topic. If you're migrating business data, then there is a completely separate topic and tools for that. What I'm going to talk a little bit about today is configuration data. So these are the types of data that is fairly static across environments, and these are the kind of data that you use in workflows and flows. You reference them using lookups, and you want to manage them in your dev environment. So one of the tools that is available within the product is called the configuration migration module. So this is like a Windows app, like an XC. You open it up, and the way it works is basically you create a schema, which you tell it what entities and attributes you're interested in extracting from the dev environment. And then once you create a schema, then you can export that data into a file, and then you can use the same tool to import that data into another environment. Some of the good things about this tool is you can now filter the data, so you don't have to get all the data from a single entity. You can run filters. It can maintain your GUIDs. It can do upserts. So it can do most of the things I would say that you would need from a reference data perspective. Obviously, it's not designed to do large volumes and things like that, but it can cover some of the core scenarios around reference data management. So in addition to the app, which you can use. Obviously, there is a PowerShell module that goes with that. So the PowerShell modules again allows you to export and import, data. So I'm just gonna quickly go through a demo for that. So let's go quickly through the demo. So let's jump back into the browser for a second. So I think we were talking about this solution. So if we go back into the contents of this solution, so let's look at the table. So we were in the contacts table. There's another table here called reference data, which is in this case a kind of key value attribute. So let's assume I want to, let's add a new record. Let's add a new record into that table quickly. Okay, so that's just a very simple, record. So we've just added a record into that table. So in general, you would want to, manage your data in, in the dev environment, basically. But I wouldn't say you treat your dev environment as the master. You're just a way of inputting and looking at the data. So what we can do is once the data is in the dev environment, you've defined your entities, you've defined your data, then again, we can go into the, the PowerShell. So what I have here is I've got another script which basically does the export. So all I have to do is just do export. It's going to ask me what environment I want to export the data from. And then it will go ahead and use that PowerShell module just mentioned to you, and it will export that data for you. So if we go back into my Visual Studio, if I can find it, let's see. Okay, so that's the Visual Studio that I have. So you can see there is a project here called data, and that's my export script. So the export script is basically just, calling some of the libraries that I have created. So it's, exporting the data. I'll show you the libraries in a second. And then all it's going to do is just going to put the data into this folder structure in here. So that's let me show you the schema. So that's the schema. So at the moment, all I'm exporting is, this entity that we just showed you on the screen and the theme. So I want to export my theme is so I can move it into the other environments. So if you look at, the changes, let's have a look at this entity. So that's, you can see that I've added a new record. So out of the box, when you use the configuration migration PowerShell module, it sticks everything in one file called data.xml. So what I've done is I've added some extra functionality to it because from a version control perspective, you don't want a single file with all the data in it because it's then difficult to see changes. So what I've done is one, I split the data into different files per entity. And two, I've also sorted the data so that it's more version control friendly and it sorts, I think, based on the GUID, if I remember correctly. So in this case, I can see that only this file changed, even though the theme is in version control. I haven't changed the theme entity because I've only made changes to the data. So now I can just commit these changes into the data in here as well. So you can see the theme is in here, but it's not been changed because I haven't made any changes in the dev environments. If they were in one file, I would just see one file with all the data in there. But this way I can easily see what entities I have changed as part of this export. So I'm not going to commit the changes now, but I just wanted to make you aware of how this works. But actually, okay, let me do it actually anyway. Changes. Okay, this is going to push directly into GitHub, by the way. So yeah, that's going to synchronize now the data into GitHub. I'll show you a demo how this works in the build environment and the ALM process, but I'm just going to go back into slides for a little bit as well. So we've spoken about the data. So we've covered the solution and then we've spoken about the data. But what if there are other things you want to do that is not covered by the solution or by the data? So in this case, we refer to these as the additional steps, and there are different ways in terms of how you can manage it. So one of the ways to manage it is using something called the package deployer. So if you in a pro dev environment, you're comfortable with C# code, you can create a project called CRM package. So there is a template that comes as part of the SDK, and then you can write your additional steps in C#. What this package allows you to do as well is it allows you to import data. So whether that's data generated using the configuration migration tool or CSV files as well. So basically, custom logic, you can put any of your custom logic into here, and then you can use that package to deploy your additional steps as part of your pipeline. Okay, so one of the things I'm going to be showing you a demo of is something called using the XRM CLI framework. So this is a PowerShell module that's been around since, as you can see, when was it? 2014. So it's got most of the things that you would need to do when doing ALM. So things like exporting, importing solutions, but also some of the things around data. And on top of that, there is the Power DevOps tool. So that's the that's the kind of Azure DevOps extension. So this extension again has been released in 2017. It supports a lot of the actions. So this slide is actually slightly out of date now because there is more tasks in the toolkit. But when I did this slide, I think a couple of months ago, I've tried to highlight some of the things that are at this point in time, at least they're not still in the Power Platform build tools. So things like being able to do mapping files when packaging and solutions, the administration mode, kind of deploying plugins and web resources, some of the things around patching and cloning solutions, configuration, migration data, service endpoints for plugins. So these are the kind of things that if you've got requirements for these kind of steps in your pipelines, you can obviously use this tool. It's free as well to add it into your pipelines and automate some of these additional steps. Okay, so before I move forward, I'm gonna do another demo for you. I've got quite a few demos today, so just wanted to show you how things work. So we've talked about the commit solution changes. So if you want to package the solution once we've committed the changes, so again, there is a very similar process using the PowerApps CLI. Again, you do the pack. If you want to execute the solution checker, you can execute the solution checker as well. And then, that's just another PowerShell command line as well. So that's that one. You can do the same thing with the Power Platform build tools as well. So, if you want to pack your solution, you can do it using the pack task. As you can see, there's no mapping file option for that at the moment. And then you can run the Power Apps checker. So the Power Apps checker, it is quite good because this has got additional step which will kind of put the output of that Power Apps checker into this kind of build. So basically, when you run it, you can actually see your results of the scan in here, which is quite useful. So you can actually look at the data in the build itself. Okay, moving on. So I'm going to skip that one. This is the configuration migration module that I use to export the data from the dev environment. And I just wanted to show you the script that I used. So if you go into the XRM CI framework on GitHub, you can see there's a lot of scripts in here. So one of the scripts that I was using today is the export CM data. So this is just a script that takes the schema file and the output, and it gives you the data by connecting to the Dataverse environment. And there is another script that called the extract data. So the first step is to export and then extract. All it does is just splits the data into different files and sorts the data basically. So, it's this two-step process, which, the second step is optional, obviously. And this is the sample solution that I was showing you. So the data, as you can see, is present in version control in here. So you can see all the data files in here. So in case you want to look at what the export script was doing, that was running earlier to export the data, it's all in kind of GitHub, so you can go in and have a look as well. Okay, so we've talked about some of the additional steps that you can do. So I'm just going to show you how that looks as well. So this is another build that builds the solution changes, but does a little bit more than the previous ones, and it uses the Power DevOps tools. So in this one, it's compiling the solution. So if you've got plugins, you want to compile the solution to generate the assemblies. If you have unit tests, you want to execute the unit tests. So what is this doing? It's, again, this is the standard tool installer, which is basically downloading the tools. So the first step that you can do is, once you basically got your unpacked solution from version control, you can apply a version. So what that is doing is updating the XML in version control to set the version based on the build number. So you've got the version in the solution version based on the build number. And then again, it's packing the solution. So all we're doing is just referring to the customizations in version control. But what you can do additionally is you can do a mapping file. So this is the file that links the plugins into the configurations. So if you go again into that sample on GitHub, I believe somewhere here should be a mapping file. Let's have a look. So yeah, there is a mapping file. Again, there are scripts to do that in version control as well, but all your mapping file is doing is basically saying every time you find this DLL, which is coming from the exported solution, don't use that DLL. Basically, I've got a version of that DLL from source control that I've just compiled in this path. So all it's just doing is just mapping the different files. So it picks up the ones from version control as opposed to the ones that are coming from the solution. So if I actually show you the customizations folder, if you go and plug in assemblies, you don't actually see the DLLs in here because they've been stripped out because of that mapping file. So when I package the solution, I provide that mapping file. It's going to add these DLLs at runtime. So far we've compiled the solution, the Visual Studio solution. We've generated another solution. We generated the CRM solution using the mapping file. And then there's another task which allows you to kind of compress that data. So this is the output of the data, and then you provide where the data is in version control, which is here. In this case, that folder contains the data. And then all you have to do also is decide whether you want to combine the data. So if you decided to split the data when you export, you can combine the data when you kind of want to generate that zip file again. And we've got the PowerApps checker again, but this is the Power DevOps tools PowerApps checker. So it's a similar task. It works slightly differently. I think this one allows you to specify specific rules. So I believe the other one, you can specify a rule set. So whether that's the app certification or solution checker. This one, if you wanted to only execute specific rules, you can just specify the rules in here. There may be some scenarios where you only want to execute specific rules on a certain solution if you don't want to run all the rules. I think most of the stuff is fairly similar. The only difference is that this one will run the scan, but it won't fail the build if there is anything, if you got like some thresholds, it won't fail the build at this point. So this task will get marked as successful. And then you've got another option in here, which is another task, which is the quality gate, which takes the input of the first one and then runs your thresholds. So in this one, if you want, you can fail the build. So from a reporting perspective, sometimes you want to see what tasks fail, what are the statistics in terms of what tasks fail. So you can make some decisions around how to improve your build process. So that's why I kind of split these two together. So you can, one of them does the scan and the other one can fail the build or makes decision on the output of that first scan. Just checking the time. We don't have a lot of time left. So this is again how you would, another way to build a solution. I'm just gonna show you something else as well, just briefly. I mean, most of the things I've shown today is using the UI version of the build process because I find it easier to walk through demos because it's more visual, but you can do the same thing using YAML. So this build is, for example, using the Power Platform build tools to export the solution and then deploy the solution into multiple environments. So again, it's another way you can do things in a version, kind of fully version control perspective. So you can see this one works slightly different because you can define all your stages in YAML. So it's a nice way actually of visualizing things in addition to how you can actually manage your kind of pipelines and version control as well. And when it comes to the release process, I'm just going to show you a quick example of what a release could look like as well, in addition to what we've seen in the last demo. So there's a lot of things you can do in the release. So obviously the basic thing is importing the solution, but you can do your kind of service endpoints for plugins. You can import your configuration data. So in the previous task, we were packaging the data, and this one we can point to the zip file to import the data. You can run your package deployer that we've spoken about. You can, update your other entities in Dataverse. You can do your environment variables. You can do your plugin secure configuration, and then you can run a lot of tests after that. So, depending how complex is your setup and how far you want to go with ALM, there's a lot of things you can do to kind of get to, as much as a fully automated process as possible. And the last thing I'm going to talk about in ALM today is there is a task that was just released recently. So as of yesterday, actually, so you're probably one of the first few to look at it. So this one is around Power Apps. So what it does is basically shares a Power App. So once you import a Power App into an environment, you want to share it because by default it will be owned by the account that imported it, which is not of a good use to anyone if you can't share it. So you have to manually share it normally. So what this task does is basically you kind of link to that right environment that you want to share the app with. Basically, this is the environment that you've deployed the app into, and then you kind of can specify, do you want to do basic, which is basically gives it the app name. Do you want to share with a group or user or tenant? If you click tenant, it kind of takes off, the details. And then these are the permissions that you want to share the app with. If you want to go advanced, which is this version here, so instead of providing all the information in here, you can just specify a link to a JSON file. And in these tasks, if you want to find out more about them, all you have to do is just click on the icon. It will tell you, what you have to do. It even points you to the sample JSON file for sharing the app. So you can see app name, user, domain, or group and group name. And if it's a tenant, you just need to provide the tenant ID. So it's quite straightforward to share the app using that task. Okay, back to the slides quickly. I'm not going to talk too much about GitHub today, but basically there is another set of actions that are available for GitHub. So depending whether you're using Visual Studio and Azure DevOps or using GitHub or some other version continuous integration engine, you can do your ALM. If you're using GitHub, there is a specific set of tasks you can use. So I'll list them in here. So when I last checked, there was about 20 tasks. The other tasks that I think I'm aware of that are not in the Power Platform build tools, for example, but are in GitHub is things like Power Apps portals and branch and clone. So these are additional things that are currently available in GitHub. But don't worry if things are not available in these tasks. You can still use the PowerApps CLI. You can still use kind of some other actions or tasks as well, so you will be able to meet your requirements. Okay, let's talk a little bit first actually around this COE toolkit. Any questions on ALM? Actually, we're kind of almost out of time, but I just want to make sure that I cover a little bit of governance before we close off the call. But any questions on ALM before that?
I don't think so. And folks, if you have questions, you can always raise your hand and unmute.
Okay. Have a think if you've got some questions. In the meantime, I'm going to try and cover a little bit of governance. So as you know, ALM is quite important, but governance is also important. So once you start using Power Platform in the organization, and there will be lots of ways you can discover that you can use Power Platform to solve different business challenges. And over time, your usage of the platform increases. So depending on how much governance you would need to apply, at some point you'll want to get a good overview of what's happening in Power Platform in your tenant. One, to kind of apply some controls. Two, you may want to maybe spot areas where you can actually increase value. You may want to kind of share things with your audience that are building apps. So there is different modules that come in with something called the COE toolkit. So this is a starter kit that gives you a lot of apps and ideas about how you can govern Power Platform in your organization. It's not a closed solution, so you download it from GitHub, you install it, and then you kind of see what you get out of the box, and then you can tweak it to work for your organization or take the bits that you need as well. So one of the main things that it does, it basically creates you a data model in Dataverse and gives you some flows and some apps. And one of the main things that it does, it basically crawls your tenant and puts all of that data for you in the COE toolkit. So as you can see on the screen, you'll have a list of all your environments, and then for each environment you'll be able to see all the components like apps and flows that have been created in that environment. And then you can start to kind of generate some data over that. So how many environments do you have? How many makers do you have? How many flows do you have that use a specific connector? So all of that kind of stuff will be useful, and you probably need to find which data points you're interested in and which data points you're likely to take action on them. There's also a Power BI report that gives you a lot of the insights that then you can start to kind of decide, where are the areas that you want to focus on. So one of the things that it does is something called the ALM Accelerator for Power Platform. So everything I've shown you today, I've gone through builds, I've gone through pipelines, I've gone through version control. So you can create all of these obviously from scratch. There's lots of docs and videos on YouTube as well. But the ALM Accelerator for Power Platform is basically an app that comes with all of these predefined templates for builds and pipelines and processes. So all you have to do is just configure it by a pro dev or add an admin as well. And then once you've got that, you can then use that process and the app to orchestrate your ALM processes. So I just show you a quick view of some of the apps that come with the COE toolkit that may be relevant for you from an ALM perspective. So one of them is the environment request app. So in some organizations, you may not allow everyone to create a new environment. So you want to have a process around requesting environments. So you can click on, you can give, your makers this app. All they have to do is just, request the environment. They can select the connectors, the regions where the environment needs to be in. And then once they put in that request through, then there's another app for admins, so they can come in here and look at these requests. So you can let's open up one of them. So you can see there's a pending request for an environment in the United Kingdom for 120 days, because after that the environment is no longer required. and you can see who needs to be an admin on that environment and some of the connectors that were requested. So then you can review that request. Once you approve it, then there is a process behind the scenes that goes in and provisions that environment. So again, that's a very nice way of managing your environment creation process. Another app that is in there is the DLP policy. So DLP policies you can go in and create obviously in the admin center. So the only addition I think at this point that this gives you is the ability to do impact analysis. So let's say I want to move, let's say I want to see what happens if I move the Dataverse connector to non-business, for example. So if I do that and then I proceed, and then there's a step in here called impact analysis, it will tell me that immediately, these are the different apps and flows that will get impacted. So then I can make a decision, is that something I want to go ahead with, or is that something I want to consult with maybe some of these makers, or at least let them know before I make this change if that's what I decided to go with. And then finally, this is the ALM Accelerator. So again, so this is a button. Once you click on it, it will take that solution and put it in version control. So it will give you some options in here to configure things, but eventually it will store that version, that solution in version control. And then you've got another button that then goes ahead and, potentially deploys that solution. But what it actually does, it kind of works on branches, so it moves changes from one branch to another. One of the things that this app gives you as well is the ability to configure some of the deployment settings. So things like environment variables, the owners of the flows, and so you can see connection references. It allows you to configure as well. You can share apps, component ownership. So it allows you to create a configuration file basically for each of your environments in terms of what these settings need to be, which is quite useful. So again, I encourage you to take a look at these apps. You may decide to use them. They may fit your needs. They may not fit your needs fully, in which case what you can do is you can either tweak them or you can get some ideas and potentially kind of tweak them or add features to them to meet your needs. For the ALM Accelerator specifically, it does require some time to get it set up, but even if you don't decide to use it, there is a lot of ideas and scripts and templates that you can reuse from here to meet maybe some of the gaps you already have in your pipelines today. So, okay, so I think that's the last thing I wanted to show today. So just to summarize, I think there's a lot of tools that you can use today, and then depending on the skills in the team, depending on what continuous integration engine and what tools you have available in the organization and how flexible and how automated you want your processes to be, you can pick different tools from different kind of levels, but the goal is to always kind of add value to your projects in terms of minimizing the time wasted on manual processes, making sure you've got consistency across your environment, making sure that your processes are streamlined, making sure that you want to reduce your defects in production by following all these kind of different quality gates. So that's all I wanted to show you today. So I'm just gonna leave it here for a minute to see if you've got any questions. We slightly ran over again, but hopefully you find this session useful. If you've got any questions, if not now, you can obviously reach out to me offline as well on the links that I've shared earlier.
No, this is very good. I wish I had this before when I started looking at pipelines a few years back. No, thank you so much, Will. I put some links here also for the accelerator, reference to the accelerator. Put your LinkedIn on the chat area if folks wanted to connect with you directly. I did put Michael Och's LinkedIn as well. I know he's heavily involved with the accelerator and COE
Exactly,
in general. So folks can contact him. He was here I think 2-3 weeks back. He was presenting on plugin development. So yeah, people are familiar with his face. But again, thank you so much for dedicating your time. Really appreciate it. and we'll see you soon. Maybe we do just a zero to hero on ALM, you know, a bunch of weeks just to
Yeah,
talk
that's a
about
good idea.
ALM. Because I think
Yeah,
there is a lot to cover here.
it's
And
one of these topics where you can talk on for weeks because there's so many different areas. And what I try to do today is just to give everyone kind of an overview of everything, so everyone's got an idea of what are the different things you can do, and then you can obviously drill down into different areas in detail if you need to. But yeah, we could do at some point something a bit more deep dive into some of these topics that
I
people
think
have.
we need to.
Yeah.
I really think. Sorry to cut you off. I really think we need to, because I mean I see the push from Microsoft in promoting the idea of makers. You can do anything you want. You have the power to do anything you want, and that is true. You know, the platform is very powerful. At the same time, if we don't really broadcast some of this understanding of, you know, governance, and if you start this way, you know, even you can empower your makers or the makers in your organization to do a lot more, but with the security that you need. So I really think we should do something like that. Maybe we put it for a vote, do like governance and ALM 4 to 8 weeks, I guess. That would be great. And of course, I'll be phoning you to pretty much lead that conversation. Really appreciate you.
ALM and COE.
Sorry, Mala.
Yeah, ALM and COE is a better idea to go zero to hero. Yeah, thank you.
For sure. Yeah, I hope to see you in June. I'm not sure if you're presenting at the Scottish Summit, but looking forward to see you in person at some point.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and thank you for organizing this series. It's been great. Yeah, there's lots of useful content from, you know, top speakers, and I'm sure everyone will find it useful. And you know, there's been lots of views on the YouTube channel if people can't make it to these sessions, so it's great.
Yep. Next week, April 7th, we're gonna have Jonas Rapp is gonna be here presenting on Fetch XML Builder for everybody, for makers, for pro devs. So if you don't know, Jonas built Fetch XML Builder, which is a tool under the XRM toolbox. So you're gonna have the maker of the tool talking about the tool and training us. So it's gonna be great. So join us April 7th. It's gonna be moderated by my friend Danish Naglekar. So you have two superheroes, in my opinion, presenting on that particular topic. So have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next week. Take care.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.